Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump says he may abandon negotiations altogether if a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine can't be made within days. He added that the U.S. wants to see the war end as thousands of soldiers continue to die each week. Jack Bradley has the latest. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee delivers a prayer from President Trump to the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister says a nuclear deal with the U.S. is possible. Jason Perry reports. The White House now says that Kilar Garcia, the immigrant deported to El Salvador, has been implicated in human trafficking. President Trump calling efforts to return him to the U.S. a shame. Iris Tao with new details surrounding the man in question. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen is among Democratic lawmakers advocating to bring Abrego Garcia back. Arian Pazdar has what the senator is saying after returning from El Salvador this afternoon. The Chinese Communist Party provides a critical lifeline to oppressive regimes worldwide. Luis Martinez dives into the link between the CCP and the authoritarian regime in Venezuela. The Trump administration releases previously classified files on the 1968 assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Also released a Biden-era plan to counter domestic terrorism that called for more information sharing with tech companies. Jason Blair with the key takeaways.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump says the U.S. could abandon peace talks with Russia and Ukraine within days, saying today that the U.S. will, quote, take a pass if there are no signs of progress on a peace deal. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass.
President Donald Trump there today saying that the U.S. may soon abandon peace talks if there's no clear progress made on ending the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, his comments come after Secretary of State Marco Rubio was in Paris yesterday, meeting with Ukrainian and European officials for negotiations. This morning, before leaving France, he said that the U.S. could move on if there's no sign of progress on a peace deal.
We're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well.
President Trump still says he's optimistic that a deal can be made, but that it needs to happen more quickly as thousands of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers are dying every week.
On average, 2,500 young people, soldiers. They're not from America. They're not from anywhere else other than Ukraine and Russia. But we want to save these lives. So
Vice President J.D. Vance in Italy today likewise says that he's optimistic the U.S. can put an end to the war.
We do feel optimistic that we can hopefully bring this war, this very brutal war, to a close.
Russia and Ukraine have agreed to a temporary partial ceasefire, not to attack each other's energy infrastructure and at sea. But both sides accuse the other of violating that every day. Now, the White House says that it might abandon negotiations altogether.
Every day, a lot of people are being killed as we talk about, as they play games. So we're not gonna take that, and we'll see. I think we have a good chance of solving the problem, however. Yeah.
European, U.S., and Ukrainian delegations agreed to meet next week in London for more talks focusing on securing a ceasefire. Now, this comes as top Ukrainian officials say that the U.S. and Ukraine yesterday signed a memorandum as a first step towards a rare earths minerals deal. President Trump said that Washington and Kiev would soon finalize the deal next week. And he's previously mentioned that a minerals deal with Ukraine is a means to recoup the roughly $120 billion in military aid that the U.S. sent Ukraine over the past 3 years. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee was in Jerusalem today, where he delivered a prayer from President Trump to the Western Wall. And on the same day, sirens sounded in Jerusalem as another projectile was fired from Yemen. NTD's Jason Perry has the Middle East update.
The newly appointed U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, was in Jerusalem, where he visited the Western Wall on Friday. He said President Trump told him that his first official act as ambassador to Israel would be to deliver Trump's handwritten prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.
Those are his initials, DT, right there in the corner. Thank you. He wrote that with his own hand.
Huckabee then placed it in a crevice between the stones of the Western Wall, where traditionally countless written prayers are placed daily throughout the year.
And I also come with a prayer that all of the hostages will come home now, and that we will bring them home. And that is the prayer of the president as well.
And on the same day, Christians in Jerusalem walked the route believed to be taken by Jesus to his crucifixion on what is now known as Good Friday. A man visiting the country shared his thoughts.
To be here in the Holy Land, even while the war is on, it is still an incredibly moving experience. My main reason for the pilgrimage is to see the holy sites.
And it is somewhat risky for people to visit Israel in the middle of a war, as sirens sounded in Jerusalem on Friday as well. Israeli forces said a missile was fired from Yemen and they had intercepted it. U.S. forces have been operating against the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen to prevent such things from happening. On Thursday, the United States Central Command said they struck the Ras Isa fuel port in Yemen. The U.S. said the Houthis were using money made from the port to support their terrorist activity, and that the strike was not meant to harm the people of Yemen. The Houthi terrorist group said that 74 people were killed by U.S. strikes and 171 were injured. The Houthis are known for attacking ships in the Red Sea, which it says is in support of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And in the Gaza Strip, a colonel in the Israel Defense Forces gave some details on their latest operations.
Over the past 10 days, we have taken control of the commanding areas of the Shijaya area to protect the civilians and bring them back home.
Israel also released video showing the destruction of another Hamas tunnel in the territory. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Iran are set for high-stakes talks over a possible nuclear deal. Iran's foreign minister was in Russia on Friday, and he said reaching an agreement is possible if the U.S. doesn't make unrealistic demands. The second round of talks between the U.S. and Iran on a nuclear deal are scheduled for Saturday and will take place in Rome. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A Democratic senator just returned from El Salvador a short time ago. He visited a deported illegal immigrant, advocating to bring him back to the U.S. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar is in Latin America with the immigration update.
If you deny the constitutional rights of one man, you threaten the constitutional rights and due process for everyone else in America.
Yes. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen returning from El Salvador on Friday afternoon. He visited deported illegal immigrant Kilar Abrego Garcia, who used to live in Maryland. Authorities deported Garcia last month due to his alleged ties to the MS-13 gang. Because of those alleged ties, a U.S. judge in 2019 ordered to keep Garcia in the country due to threats he might face from rival gangs in El Salvador. Last week, the Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration must now facilitate Garcia's return. Senator Van Hollen says El Salvador's mega prison, where Garcia is being held, violates international law.
The policy at that prison, CCOT, is to have no communication, not with your lawyer, not with your family, with nobody. That is a violation of international law.
As this case plays out, the Trump administration pressing forward with its efforts to combat illegal immigration. The Trump administration's crackdown on illegal immigration continues. Authorities are deporting alleged gang members, violent offenders, and also individuals who don't face any other charges besides entering the country illegally. New numbers now show how many people have been arrested or deported since President Trump took office. FBI Director Kash Patel announced on Thursday that 6,000 subjects have been detained and arrested, which includes over 300 Trendy Aragua and over 100 MS-13 members. On Friday, the Associated Press published a review saying that over 1,000 international students have had their visas revoked or their legal status terminated since late March. Some of those cases made nationwide headlines, such as the arrest of Columbia student Mahmoud Khalil. He participated in pro-Palestine activity on campus. The Trump administration has long accused such students of supporting the terrorist group Hamas.
We wouldn't have let you in the first place. If you had told us that, if you told us, I'm going to America not just to study at your university, but to tear up your campus, we would have never let you in.
Also this week, ICE and Homeland Security investigations announced that they arrested over 1,000 illegal alien workers since Trump took office. A statement reads that this is the highest rate of arrests in Homeland Security investigations history. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
President Trump calls efforts to bring back Kilar Abrego Garcia a shame after a Maryland senator met with the alleged MS-13 gang member deported to El Salvador. The White House today also highlighted a newly surfaced allegation that Abrego Garcia was involved in human trafficking. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
I have no interest in that prisoner. That prisoner's record is unbelievably bad.
Speaking in the Oval Office on Friday, President Trump condemns Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen's latest visit to El Salvador seeking to bring back Kilar Abrego Garcia. Garcia, who lived in Maryland, is an alleged MS-13 gang member that the Trump administration deported to El Salvador in an administrative error overlooking a court order barring his removal to his home country. The president doubles down on a stance that he should not be brought back to the U.S. and highlights how dangerous the MS-13 gang is.
They kill people with knives because it's more painful. Very famous for the knifing and killing of two young 16-year-old girls walking to school one day, and they sliced them up into little pieces and killed them. That's MS-13.
While Garcia's attorneys deny that he's part of MS-13 and argues that he has no criminal history in the U.S., two separate judges affirmed that Garcia is an MS-13 member. The administration this week released new details, saying he was arrested with two other well-known gang members and had an MS-13 gang symbol. The president also pointed to Garcia's wife's previous allegation that he repeatedly beat her up.
He punched and scratched her on the eye, left her bleeding after throwing her laptop on the floor. They call him the Maryland man. He's a Maryland father. No, this is a violent person.
The White House today further saying that Garcia was incredibly implicated in human trafficking and human smuggling, as he was once pulled over with 8 people in his car on a 3-day trip with no luggage. The White House Deputy Chief of Staff saying that even if he returns to the U.S., he will be deported again.
If we were to forcibly retrieve him, the irony would be is that because he's here illegally and has a deportation order, he would simply be deported the second time back to El Salvador, because the withholding order that has been so much discussed is no longer valid or enforced because he's a member of a foreign terrorist organization.
The Supreme Court last week asked the Trump administration to facilitate Garcia's return to the U.S. The White House says that's up to El Salvador, whose President Nayib Bukele has made clear that he has no intention of returning what he calls a terrorist. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Chinese Communist Party provides a critical lifeline to oppressive regimes worldwide. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez dives into the link between the CCP and the authoritarian regime in Venezuela.
Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela, Vladimir Putin in Russia, and Ali Khamenei in Iran are at the center of brutal oppression in their home countries and in their respective regions. One of the main things that these three authoritarian oppressive regimes have in common is the financial, the military, and the technological and diplomatic support that they're receiving from the Chinese Communist Party. Now, in the case of the Venezuelan regime, atop of it sits Nicolás Maduro Moros, who has been indicted by U.S. courts under charges of narco-terrorism, and who, together with Vladimir Padrino López, they lead the Cartel de los Soles, the cartel of the suns, named after the sun-shaped insignia that Venezuelan generals wear on their uniforms. Maduro has been accused of personally negotiating multi-ton shipments of FARC-produced cocaine, directed the Cartel of the Suns to provide military-grade weapons to the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, and coordinated with narcotic traffickers in Honduras and other countries to facilitate large-scale drug trafficking across the region. The Chinese Communist Party's support of the Venezuelan regime predates Nicolás Maduro. It was Hugo Chavez who led Venezuela into socialism and forced a single-party rule system. During his reign as leader of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez was the Latin American leader who traveled the most to China. And in between 2007 and 2017, the Venezuelan regime secured more than $60 billion in Chinese financing. And during that same period of time, the Venezuelan government bought more than $615 million worth of military equipment. Diplomatically, the Chinese Communist Party helped the Maduro regime gain a seat in the UN Human Rights Council, and the Chinese Communist Party has also used its veto power, the UN Security Council, to block resolutions demanding free and fair elections in Venezuela. And a recent Reuters investigation also revealed that Chinese telecommunications companies are assisting the Maduro regime in setting up its advanced citizen surveillance programs. During the past 4 years, the Chinese Communist Party has been financing the Maduro regime by circumventing U.S. sanctions on Venezuelan oil exports. We now know that Russia's Rosneft, their oil company, is helping Venezuelan shipments travel to Malaysian teapot refineries, where that oil is rebranded as Malaysian and sold to Beijing at discounted prices. Those shipments to Malaysia, though, now have stalled after the Trump administration ordered a 25% tariff on goods from countries buying Venezuelan oil. It is important to note that President Trump has invoked the Alien Enemies Act in response to the presence of Tren de Aragua, also known as TDA, cells here in the United States. Tren de Aragua is a foreign terrorist organization that works in conjunction with the Cartel of the Suns that is led by Nicolás Maduro, who in turn is financed and supported by the Chinese Communist Party. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Never before released files on the RFK assassination have been published by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, plus newly declassified documents on a Biden administration strategy to counter domestic terrorism. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
10,000 unreleased pages related to the 1968 assassination of Senator Robert F. Kennedy were made public by Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard. It's the first time these records have been openly available following decades of speculation and calls for transparency. The release is part of President Trump's directive. Trump has been vocal about his intention to increase transparency within U.S. intelligence agencies. These documents were previously stored across multiple federal agencies. Officials said they also found an additional 50,000 pages of RFK assassination-related documents in FBI and CIA storage. They say these files are still being reviewed and will be shared in batches later. And a Biden-era government-wide strategy to counter domestic terrorism was also declassified by Gabbard. The 15-page strategy was developed in 2021 after the January 6th Capitol riot. It pushed for better information sharing with tech companies, legislation for banning so-called assault weapons, stopping radicalization in prisons, and looking into extremism in the military. The plan had a 4-part goal: understand and share domestic terrorism-related information, prevent terrorism, recruitment, and mobilization to violence, disrupt and deter domestic terrorism activity, and confront long-term contributors to domestic terrorism. The strategy also advocated looking into ways to identify domestic terrorism through financial activity. This included more coordination with financial institutions and monitoring citizens' financial records. A lot of conservatives have been critical about alleged coordination between federal agencies and tech companies, claiming that the Biden administration tried to silence and remove conservative opinions in violation of the First Amendment. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
President Trump today announcing a new rule that would make it easier to fire career federal workers involved in policymaking. In a post on Truth Social, Trump says he's directing the Office of Personnel Management to classify these employees in the service schedule policy/career. The goal of the new label is to ensure that career policymakers will advance the policy interests of the president. The rule traces back to an executive order issued during the first Trump administration titled Schedule F. It sought to reclassify tens of thousands of federal workers who were involved in policymaking. The rule was later revoked by President Biden. Speaking about the re-implementation, President Trump says it will allow the federal government to, quote, run like a business. Coming up, more details released on Thursday's shooting at Florida State University. The community is mourning the victims. David Lamb has more. A UCLA graduate student is detained at the U.S.-Mexico border amid ongoing immigration enforcement actions under the Trump administration. Christina Corona reports. As the pressure builds for Harvard to comply with the federal government's demands, the Education Department today is asking for complete disclosure of the school's sources of foreign gifts. Arlene Richards has the details. A day of mourning and support for the community of Florida State University. Locals and authorities try to piece together the tragic shooting on Thursday. We have new details on the incident. NTD's David Lamb reports.
A day after the tragic shooting at Florida State University in Tallahassee, the community mourning and holding vigil for the victims. In a post on X, one family member said that one of the two people who died was his brother, Robert Morales, reportedly a food service worker with Aramark. NTD reached out to Aramark for confirmation, but we haven't heard back. According to the post, Morales loved his job at FSU and his beautiful wife and daughter. Media outlets are reporting the second victim as a 45-year-old man, a father of two from South Carolina, who's also an Aramark employee. And medical authorities say 6 people were hospitalized.
Those were gunshot wounds to extremities, chest, abdomen, all in rather stable condition. We activated certain resources that we have.
They're expected to make full recoveries. The suspect was also hospitalized, Phoenix Eichner, the 20-year-old stepson of a sheriff's deputy. Tallahassee PD released a timeline of the events. Around 11 a.m. Thursday, the suspect arrives at the university's parking garage. He stays in the area for an hour, moving in and out of the vehicle. At 11:51 a.m., Eichner leaves the parking garage. Between 11:56 and 11:57, the first shot is fired. By 11:58, multiple 911 calls were made. 12 p.m., Eichner is shot by responding officers and taken into custody. The whole incident was over in under 5 minutes. Eichner allegedly used his stepmother's former service handgun. Law enforcement says he also had a shotgun.
This community is strong, and unfortunately, we've dealt with a couple of these type of incidents, and this community will rally together, and we will be stronger after this, and we'll be better after this.
The investigation remains open as law enforcement interviews witnesses and victims. The FBI is requesting that people provide or upload any information or recordings related to the shooting to www.fbi.gov/FSU shooting. David Lamb, NTD News.
A UCLA graduate student is in federal custody after being detained at the U.S.-Mexico border. Her case is drawing protests on campus amid growing concerns over the Trump administration's immigration policies. NTD's Christina Corona has more from Los Angeles.
We're here on the UCLA campus where a protest erupted yesterday after a former international graduate student was detained by U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the U.S.-Mexico border. The student was reportedly detained while attempting to re-enter the U.S. at the San Isidro crossing on Wednesday. UCLA issued a statement confirming the student remains in Customs and Border Protection and is actively working to gather more information. The university emphasized its commitment to supporting international students, stating they are vital to the Bruin community. This follows the Trump administration's push to cancel student visas and advance mass deportation efforts nationwide. UCLA students held a rally Thursday to protest these policies. Earlier this month, UCLA Chancellor Julio Frank announced that 6 current and 6 former students had their visas revoked. The student's health condition during detention remains undisclosed. As of Friday, the student's name and the reason for her detention have not been shared. Reporting from the city of Los Angeles, Christina Corona, NTD News.
The Department of Education today is asking Harvard to be transparent about its relations with foreign sources. This comes as the Trump administration ramps up its pressure on the school to comply with federal law. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has the details.
The federal government is determined to get compliance from Harvard. In a records request to the university on Friday, the Department of Education requested disclosure of foreign donations. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon said in a press release that Harvard has not been fully transparent or complete in its disclosures, and that this was unlawful. According to the release, under the Higher Education Act, post-secondary institutions receiving federal financial assistance must disclose foreign source gifts and contracts with a value of $250,000 or more annually. The request lists a number of items, including the identities of all known parties involved in each of Harvard's foreign source gifts, all records regarding or referencing gifts and/or contracts between Harvard and foreign governments without limitation. The bulk of the department's information request involved foreign students, such as a list identifying all full or partial funding sources and amounts for any research conducted by foreign expelled students. The statement says that education law monitors foreign influence to protect national security and academic integrity. McMahon said the request is the first step to ensure Harvard is not being manipulated by or doing the bidding of foreign entities, which include actors who are hostile to the interests of the United States and American students. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The spokesperson for Harvard told The Hill that the school's reports include information on gifts and contracts from foreign sources exceeding the $250,000 limit, including contracts to provide executive education, other training, and academic publications. Harvard has until May 17th to provide the records. Changes were made today to a White House COVID-19 website to include the likelihood that the virus came from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. The page now displays an image of President Trump and the text "lab leak" and the true origins of COVID-19. Changes made by the Trump administration include comments on a number of entities and individuals and how they responded during the pandemic, including former White House COVID-19 advisor Anthony Fauci. Under the Biden administration, the webpage included information on how to order COVID-19 tests, vaccines, and treatment, as well as information on long COVID. Coming up, President Trump saying the U.S. will drop peace efforts between Russia and Ukraine if no progress is made soon, agreeing with the same message from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. What's next in negotiations? Foreign policy and national security analyst Armen Kurdian joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump will stop pushing for peace between Russia and Ukraine if there are no signs of progress soon. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said today that the U.S. will need to determine within a matter of days, quote, whether or not this is doable in the next few weeks. Trump had promised to end the war soon after returning to office in January. Joining us now to discuss these latest developments is foreign policy and national security analyst Armen Kurdian. He's also a retired U.S. Navy captain and political strategist. Armen, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, with Rubio's comments here saying if the war won't end, the U.S. needs to move on, how are you reading the situation? Is this deal likely to happen?
Good afternoon, Tiffany. If you remember, I've been on this network several times talking about how important it was to aid Ukraine and support them militarily. Donald Trump took a chance on Russia with this brilliant idea of the minerals deal and the economic cooperation between the United States and Ukraine in exchange for some measure of security, and then ultimately got Zelensky to agree to that deal. Russia showed, at least on the surface, that they were open to this, but their recent actions have shown that they are not. I think this was an important step for Trump to actually take to demonstrate, not just to himself, but also to the rest of the world, that Russia is not interested in peace. So what is going to happen is Russia is going to do what Russia does, and they're going to say, oh, yeah, we really do want peace, and perhaps offer another tiny olive branch in order to continue to attempt to prosecute the war on their own terms while still giving the West kind of hope for peace. Donald Trump has got to really understand, and the U.S. government has also got to understand, that what Russia says and what Russia does are two completely different things. I'm not hopeful at this time that a peace deal or a ceasefire is forthcoming.
On that note, President Trump did say Friday he would need to, quote, see an enthusiasm to want to end it from both sides, adding he would know soon. What would that enthusiasm that Trump is speaking of look like for the U.S. to continue mediating a deal?
Really, enthusiasm needs to be a complete ceasefire, temporary ceasefire at this point. What Russia has done says, well, we're not going to attack Ukrainian energy facilities, which from Russia's standpoint kind of makes sense. If you want to take over a big part of the country, you don't want to blow up the infrastructure, but you do want to destroy the military capability and the other types of geopolitical targets within Ukraine to weaken them militarily to make them more easy to subjugate. So Russia's action, frankly, up to this point, really haven't been very substantive.
Now,
Going forward, I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from a, switching gears a bit, from a political perspective, could this be seen as damaging to the Trump presidency, essentially, say, abandoning Ukraine, given that he did promise to end the conflict in the early days of his presidency?
I don't necessarily think so. Russia understands force. Russia understands strength. Now, Trump may decide to take on the most draconian sanctions he possibly can against the Russian government, but even those I don't think will necessarily stop anything. The biggest problem with the West in aiding Ukraine militarily is that we've given them enough to continue the fight, but not necessarily to win. We haven't gone all in on support. We've just seen that Germany has undertaken a total of 7 billion euros in this year. That is a massive amount of aid for Germany, which has a strict policy in its constitution about not getting involved in foreign wars. This is a huge step for them. Anti-missile defenses, surface-to-air missiles, tracked vehicles, small light weapons, all of those things are going to Ukraine to help them fight. But if Ukraine really has any chance of them pushing everything back, we need to go all in on support on basic things, like artillery and other support items. But at the same time, Ukraine also needs to step up, and they need to reduce their conscription age. They just reduced it from 27 to 25, but they need to bring it all the way down to 21 because they are running out of people. They have 38 million people. Russia has 150 million people. It's a simple game of numbers. Ukraine can't win the war unless they expand the amount of the body of whom they can build their army from.
And Armen, I want to go back to one of the earlier points. Now, in the instance that this deal, the ceasefire and then peace deal, doesn't go through, how might this impact the administration's position on Ukraine and Russia, for example, that minerals deal that's been talked about?
Well, Donald Trump does understand and recognize the importance of a minerals deal, especially now with what is transpiring between the United States and China in terms of rare earth metals. China is not going to provide us any more rare earth metals. And while we have them here in the United States, we've made it intolerably expensive to actually pull them out. So there is a measure of national security for us to work with Ukraine on those minerals and pull them out for our purposes. Half of those deposits right now are actually in areas controlled by Russia, give or take a little bit. So there is great value to the United States in bringing this war to an end. But until Russia sees that they can't complete this war or prosecute this war successfully, because they have gone all in. Almost a third of their economy is right now devoted to winning this war. That's saying something considering how hard they're working. So the Trump administration wants peace. They understand that peace is valuable and it's a lot more profitable in the end than war and destruction. I know that Trump is still going to continue to talk peace. He's not necessarily going to talk about Russian defeat if he decides to really help support Ukraine militarily more. But he's going to basically say, hey, we're ready to come to the table at any minute and stop the fighting if Russia is willing to do the same thing. Until then, we're going to keep forward, but we need peace. I think that's the message that they're going to do, and I think the rest of the world will understand that.
And given the national security implications you just raised right now, how likely are we to see that Ukraine minerals deal inked next week, as some reports are indicating?
Well, I want to believe that a minerals deal will occur at some point. It's a little bit further off, I think, right now than what we might have expected it to be quite recently. So I think when we see where Russia is, a Russian withdrawal from certain areas, whether there's some kind of negotiated statement or treaty, the one thing I want to be very, very careful of, and this is the one thing where I think the administration might have faltered a little bit, is you don't want to look like United States and Russia are splitting the gains in Ukraine kind of going forward for simply our own benefit. There has to be an altruistic face upon this entire effort between us, the Western European nations, in the sense that peace is what's necessary. We got to stop killing and stop the destruction. Ultimately, free markets and economic benefits is a rising tide lifts all boats. But it can't simply be seen as the U.S. wants to profit off of this deal for no other reason besides stopping the war.
A diplomatic dance for sure. Armen Kurdian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany.
And what do people make of the latest development and the United States' current involvement in the Russia-Ukraine conflict? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National in D.C. to hear from the folks.
What do you think about the U.S.'s current involvement in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, starting with you? Difficult. Putin is definitely unstable. Ukraine is fighting for their lives. It's a tough situation.
Spending a whole lot more time on it. It's taking resources away from probably more important things.
Russia invaded the Ukraine, and we have an obligation to help support them, because what happens there, we're just as vulnerable. And I think a lot of other nations are vulnerable too.
The war needs to end. I like what President Trump is doing and trying to negotiate a ceasefire, and hopefully Trump can reverse all that crap that happened the last 4 or 5 years.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. might have to drop the peace talk if there's no progress made in the coming days. What do you make of that?
I mean, I'm not sure if it's just a bargaining maneuver, which it could be. I think everything is just this, introducing a lot of chaos in order to trigger some other path forward.
In the grander scheme of things, I feel like we should just stay the hell out of it, let them fight it out and be done with it.
He needs to reevaluate it, for sure. Take it back to the table and try to find something that they can come together with.
Well, I mean, there was positive messaging about the mineral rights deal. I think that's going to help us even further along the peace trade.
What should be the United States' next foreign policy priority?
Moving Gazans out of their territory to build a wonderful, spectacular vacation destination is not American priority.
I think we need to do something about our homeless veterans before we start trying to take care of the rest of the world.
I'm largely neutral with a lot of those. I think trying to protect our own folks as well as other people who are vulnerable outside the U.S.
People are already trying to negotiate with these tariffs. I think China, in the end, they're in a worse shape economy, and they'll have to do something. Anything that we decide foreign policy-wise has to put the American people first. That's kind of my thoughts on that.
And coming up in the NHL, Washington's Alex Ovechkin extends his own goal record. Could he also be looking at a Stanley Cup title? Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in the world of boxing as Jake Paul, fresh off his win over Mike Tyson, announced he'll face former WBC middleweight champion Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. this June. Now, what weight will they be fighting in?
Yeah, this is going to be cruiserweight, which is a maximum 200 pounds. And that's just one step below heavyweight, which is unlimited, actually. So for Paul, now, heavyweight is what Paul fought Mike Tyson at last November. He actually weighed 227 for that match. So he would obviously have to come down from that. But his previous fights, he was all under 200 for those. So not a huge adjustment. In fact, he might already be under 200 as we speak. Now, for Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., he was a middleweight champion in the WBC. Now, middleweight is a 160 weight maximum. But his last fight, he was already up to a cruiserweight then. So he's already at the weight you would think for this fight. So it shouldn't be a big adjustment for either fighter as far as for the weight. Now, as far as comparing, I mean, Tyson last November, he definitely brought a huge crowd to that event. A lot of excitement, everyone to see what he was at age 58. But the match actually wasn't really that close really after the second round. This one should be a lot closer now. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. is 39 years old. Jake Paul is 27. Julio Cesar Chavez is 8-6 in his last 14 fights after a 46-0 start. So I think this is going to be a much closer fight. This is going to be on June 28th, so just a couple months away. So mark your calendars.
Shifting gears to tennis, French Open officials said they'll have a special ceremony to honor former champion Rafael Nadal at next month's tournament.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Nadal, of course, he won 22 majors, including 14 French Opens. That is the most ever. That's twice as many as anybody else. Now, unfortunately for Nadal, he missed this event in 2023. He missed really the whole year 2023 with that hip injury. Last year, then he came back. He was not quite the same player. Ended up losing in the first round to Alexander Zverev, who was actually a top 10 player, so there's certainly no shame losing to him. But he really wasn't quite the same player the whole year. Finally, in October, or I think it was in maybe September actually, he announced his retirement, so they didn't have a chance to honor him. But it looks like they will do something here. What they'll actually do remains a mystery, but it's going to happen next month at the French Open.
Well, moving to NBA news, tonight we'll have the final two games of the NBA's play-in round. What is at stake here?
Yeah, it's win and you're in the playoffs here. Now, we've got Atlanta versus Miami for the Eastern Conference. Whoever wins that gets the 8th seed. They'll face top-seeded Cleveland then in the first round. The second game is Dallas versus Memphis. As for the Western Conference, whoever wins that game gets the 8th seed in the West. They will face Oklahoma City. Now, let's actually listen to Dallas head coach Jason Kidd talking about Anthony Davis's big game Wednesday night when they beat Sacramento.
Yeah, I think just his character. He's a leader. He's won it. We've said this over and over. He's won at every level. I've been with him in a play-in game situation, and so he has some good looks there that just didn't go down for him. But again, the positivity of him believing in his teammates and putting his teammates in a position to be successful was at a high, and they were able to benefit from that. But then, again, defensively, being able to change shots, being able to rebound was huge for us. And so he's our leader, him and Clay. We're going to lean on those guys as we go to Memphis.
Yeah, Davis and Klay Thompson combined to score 50 points in their win. I'm sure they'll be leaning on them tonight. Now for Dallas, of course, this is not quite what they imagined after trading Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis back in February. Davis has missed 24 of the possible 34 games since. Plus, our other superstar, Kyrie Irving, went down 6 weeks ago with a torn ACL, and of course, he has been out ever since that. But if they win tonight, they can at least salvage a playoff appearance for this year, although it will not be easy taking on Oklahoma City should they win. So that series would start Sunday, though.
Well, looking at NHL news, Washington's Alex Ovechkin scored again yesterday in the final day of the regular season.
Yeah, number 44 this season actually for him, so that's tied for third in the NHL, number 897 in his career, extending his own record over Wayne Gretzky. I'm still actually blown away by the fact that he's still in his prime. As I mentioned, this is his 44th of the year. That actually ties a record for the most goals by a player, 39 or over, ties him with the great Gordie Howe, who's now third in the all-time goals. But he has something to do something really special here. He just broke the goals record. The Capitals, meanwhile, they are the top seed in the Eastern Conference. Should they win the Stanley Cup title, that'd be quite a couple months for him, winning the Stanley Cup and breaking Wayne Gretzky's record. So stay tuned.
A lot more news there for sure. Davis Owens, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
The White House is hosting the annual Easter egg roll on Monday. The yearly tradition started in 1878 during the Rutherford B. Hayes administration. Every year, kids are invited to the South Lawn to decorate eggs and play games. 30,000 real eggs will be used for the event. But new this year, the White House solicited corporate sponsors for the tradition. The funds raised will be sent to the White House Historical Association. Some former White House officials have voiced ethical concerns about the sponsorship. And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.